Let's move on to number 3 then, and we go to Rangers and Alfredo Morelos. Stefan, I think like stuff like his goal scoring record speaks for itself, but I think it's more just how important he is individually or to Rangers as a whole. And I think that's actually been seen given his scoring record tailed off in the last 9 or 10 games of the season. Just again, he's only 23. How much of an impact or how important is his impact on this Rangers team?
Oh, I think without a doubt, he's probably Rangers' most important player in my opinion. You kind of look at his goals scored, or even just his general record this season: 29 goals and 10 assists, and he was on the cusp of actually surpassing his record last season of 30 goals and 11 assists. And if you consider, as you say there, Neil, his goal scoring kind of dried up in the last couple of maybe last month before the lockdown, and he maybe still had another 7 or 8 games to play. It strikes me that he was going to quite comfortably surpass what was, even back last season, a truly remarkable record as well. And I just think when it comes to Morelos, there's so much hype and so much heat around him as an individual, and for the most part, I really relish just ignoring all of it. To be perfectly honest with you, whenever I watch him play for Rangers, or even just people talking about it on Twitter, you can't even make a comment about the guy or praise him, or maybe even criticise him as well to an extent sometimes, without just so much attention being drawn towards it. And he is a guy who just seems to galvanise so much attention about him. And I think that's maybe a kind of reaction to his talents, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. I know there's another aspect to his game, don't worry, I will get onto that. But as a goal scorer, he's absolutely tremendous. I mentioned his kind of overall record there, but the thing that really stands out to me, I think really the thing that kind of underlines his genuine talent is just how well he's performed in Europe for Rangers this season. I mean, to just put it bluntly, in 16 Europa League games this season, he's got 14 goals and 4 assists. And I know a lot of these games are against kind of, with all due respect, diddy teams around Europe. At the same time, how many times have we seen Celtic and Rangers drop out because of these diddy teams? And there's just no marking. There's just no making excuses for the fact that he scores goals when Rangers need him to score goals. He got 6 goals in the group stages against teams like Porto and Feyenoord and Young Boys. He played 90 minutes against Bayer Leverkusen and obviously didn't get a goal then. But to be fair, Rangers as a whole just weren't great that night, in my opinion, or simply they just couldn't match a much better Bayer Leverkusen team. But I think he's came through the Europa League with flying colours, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. And if you kind of take a step back from all the noise of Scottish football, I think that's kind of what big clubs will be looking at. They'll be certainly be looking at what he's done for Rangers in the Scottish Premiership. They'll be looking at what he's done in domestic competitions. But I think they'll really be focusing in on what he's done in Europe against some of these teams like Porto and Feyenoord. And while we can certainly spend maybe half an hour talking about who hasn't scored against Celtic yet, and I'm sure that's why every Celtic fan's probably screaming into his phone right now as he's listening to this, I honestly don't think Tottenham or Aston Villa or whoever else who may be interested in him, I don't think they lose much sleep over whether how many goals he scored against Celtic, as long as he's been able to put those numbers up in a European competition. I think that's ultimately what it comes down to, and that ultimately underlines how promising a player is. I've also kind of got some stats on his kind of disciplinary stuff, but I'll maybe jump into that afterwards and let James put a word in.
Yeah, we can get. I think we need to probably touch on it, don't we? But is it kind of bittersweet when like shows such as ours kind of highlight Morelos? Not that he needs much highlighting given how good his scoring record is, but is it kind of bittersweet for Rangers knowing that, particularly his record in Europe, I'm sure that was some sort of scoring record as well before Christmas, that other clubs, particularly down south, probably are going to be sniffing about.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if they weren't. Like Stefan says, I completely agree. Yeah, the fact that he's not scored against Celtic, well, that's an incredible amount of fun for Celtic fans, and they clearly love that. There's no scout in Europe that's going to be looking like, oh, last time Morelos, oh no, wait, hang on a minute, he's not scored against Celtic. Not when he's when he's banging in goals against the likes of like you say Porto, Feyenoord, Young Boys. That's what's going to grab their attention, and then they'll look through his goal scoring record in general and be like, oh yeah, okay, he's got 29 goals in 50, 40 odd games this season. So yeah, he's clearly an immense player, really exciting player. I think the things that really stand out for me is the way that particularly when he's playing against a team that employ a high line, the way he can just burst beyond and catch them out. He's so good at it. We saw it a lot in the Europa League, particularly against Braga. Actually, in that game at Ibrox, again the one where they won 3-2. Obviously, the first hour or so, Braga were immense in my opinion. They were 2-0 up, they were flying, but even then, Morelos managed to catch them out. I think it was 2 or 3 times in the first half alone where he was able to just burst beyond the last man, and all of a sudden he's got 20 yards of open space to run into for a one-on-one. And I think that's okay. Obviously, in those instances he didn't score, but I actually think that's what Morelos is maybe best at. It's when he sort of drifts out to the right of the pitch and drives in and then fires a low shot across goal towards the far post. Like, he does it so often, and with good reason. That's how a lot of his goals come around. But we've also seen as well, like in the group stages away to Feyenoord, like those 2 headers that he scores, both of them were brilliant headers. And he's just one of these players that he's got a lot of strings to his bow. And Celtic games aside, he generally steps up on the big occasions. I think he's his physicality is incredibly impressive, but so is his technique as well. I mean, like that goal against Porto at Ibrox where he sort of cuts inside on his left and drills it into the bottom left corner, like that's an absolutely superb finish that anyone would be proud of. And while the goals have dried up, I think since the turn of the year, I think it was just that one goal he got against Hamilton in the cup. I don't think that's indicative overall at all. I think actually that's the exception to his general form, because he has been playing absolutely brilliantly for the last 2 seasons now. Obviously, we will touch on the disciplinary stuff, but even this season that has improved in my opinion. I think he got sent off at Parkhead, didn't he, when Rangers won 2-1? But apart from that, his disciplinary record has improved vastly, and I think that's something that has been really drilled into him. I mean, I know that a lot of as soon as he got sent off again, people were like, see, there we go, same old Morelos, he still can't control himself. But I think in general, he has looked a lot more controlled. He's been able to channel that aggression into his play this season for the most part, and he's looked like a more complete player for doing so.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the difference this season in his temperament has been there to see, because as you say, I think the sending off, as far as I can remember, it was like a really silly I think it was a second booking for diving, wasn't it, really late on, which again, really stupid, like shouldn't be doing it. There's absolutely no need. I'm pretty sure as well he was in a really good position, but I think you're right. I think he doesn't get wound up as easily as even just plain as day. Like there's been no red cards in the league. That came through 2 bookings, which I think you've got to give him credit, and also Steven Gerrard and his coaching team credit. I know you've got stats in that, Stefan, but just before we get to that, I think like James made a kind of couple of points touching on it there. Is that what he's got in his locker? That he's not just a goal scorer, that even if he's not scoring goals, he's going to make it really difficult for defences. So if he scores goals, which is a lot of the time brilliant, but even if he doesn't, he's going to be dragging defenders all over the place, and he's just so physically demanding to defend. Is that the extra string to his bow, like James touched upon, that means that clubs down south would take a punt on him because they think that, well, we know that at the very least that's what he's going to do if the goals don't happen every single game, or there's a patch of games where he doesn't score.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right to illustrate that, and I think that's something that maybe gets overlooked as well when you think of Morelos. I think the thing that really makes him stand out is that he's not just a great goal scorer, but he's also a great scorer of goals, and he's also, for the most part, a very good creator of goals as well. You simply can't ignore the fact that alongside those 29 goals he's got this season, he's got 10 assists as well. And as James says, the interesting thing about Morelos is I don't actually think he's particularly fast. Like, I mean, he is, by no means is he slow, but he's not he doesn't strike me as a number 9 who's hanging on the shoulder of the last defender, waiting to kind of just beat the guy in a 30-yard race. That physicality is something I think that actually is probably more important to him in that kind of move. And by that move, I mean like when he kind of peels off behind a fullback and runs in, or he managed to get on top of a ball played in behind the centre backs. I don't think it's his pace that pulls him away from defenders. I think it's actually his physicality, because he gets in front of them and he's very, very good at making sure they can't get around him. And just to kind of suggest my own theory here as to why we've seen this kind of disciplinary issue with him. Because if you actually look at his record before he moved to Rangers, when he was playing for in the, I think it's the Danish league actually, or no, it was the Swedish, I think actually. Helsinki, sorry, Finland. I was wrong. Both counts. He didn't really have that disciplinary record, and I think this is just my suggestion. I think he's probably arrived in Scottish football, and he's had to adapt to a far more physical league. And I think what he's had to wrestle with is the fact that he has the physicality to match the league, but he has to basically figure out how he uses it. And as a forward, when he's up against these humongous centre backs, Scott McKenna's probably the most obvious one he's had this kind of duel with since he's arrived. He's had to learn as a young player how to basically make sure he uses his physicality to continue scoring goals, but also not to use it too much to get sent off. And as I just said there, I did kind of look into like how many his disciplinary record this season, and last season he was picking up a yellow card every 232 minutes for Rangers. This season he's picked up a yellow card every 405 minutes, and I don't think that's anything to kind of laugh at. The rate of yellow cards, if you want to call it that, has basically halved, and I have no doubt that eventually he'll get to a point with Rangers, or maybe if he moves on somewhere else, that he'll grow up and he'll maybe mature a bit more, and he'll realise that if he uses his physicality properly, then it can help him score goals and beat centre halves who are twice the size of him, and he can do that without really maybe snapping back at flicks from another player or getting wound up by Scott Brown or whatever have you. And once he does that, it will only be another string to his bow. And I think that's ultimately why I don't let it really dampen his stock, in my opinion. I just think it's a blip in his overall progression, and I think it's something he will, and he is, in my opinion, overcoming.